Hey folks, CherylLivingForHealth.com, and today I want to talk to you about a very common condition, which is the rotator cuff tear. So what is it? What does it mean? And what are some things that we could do about it and why? So what is a rotator cuff tear? Well, let's first talk about the rotator cuff real quick. The rotator cuff is actually 4 muscles that all combine into one common tendon on the side of our shoulder here. And if we have a tear, it means we have a tear in one or more of those tendons. And this could cause some pain or discomfort. So this could happen for various reasons, whether it's trauma, arthritis, even just aging. But the rotator cuff muscles are so important in the overall health of our shoulder because they have a particular role that keep our shoulder in the right place. If the rotator cuffs are torn, that means it's going to lead to weakness in our rotator cuff muscles, and that can lead to other things. The most common thing would be shoulder impingement, which is that numbness and tingling down the arm. So if the rotator cuff is not doing its job, other things can happen in the shoulder that are going to cause other issues. So it's really important to keep our rotator cuff muscles strong, and that's what I want to show you today, which is 3 basic exercises. Now, very quickly, if you are currently in pain right now in one of your shoulders or both, please go see a medical professional. Certainly don't do my exercises if you are in pain right now. If you are currently working with a medical professional, please feel free to share these 3 basic exercises with that medical professional before doing these exercises. So here we go. Exercise number 1. Our first exercise is going to cover internal and external rotation, which is one of the prime movements for the rotator cuff muscles. So that means that shoulder moving internally and externally. So it looks a little bit like this with our arm bent, with our arm straight, internal, external rotation. So one way to do that is through a band. I'm going to start with internal rotation. Now there's 2 main things that we need to remember when we're doing this. One is to keep a little bit of space here. You don't want to lock your elbow in on your rib cage. There's just a little bit of blood flow to really no blood flow, especially as we get older in this area, so we don't want to block that. So you can put a shirt here, a towel here. Just make sure there's at least a little bit of space between the elbow and the rib cage. That's number 1. Number 1 is the space. Number 2 is keeping the hand open. Closing the wrist, you're going to work a little bit more of the chest. Keep our hand open. We're going to focus a little bit more on that, what's called the subscapularis, which is responsible for internal rotation of our rotator cuff. So hand open, a little bit of space here, and we're going to internally rotate. We want to make sure that we also externally rotate, so I'm going to use my opposite hand. Now this one, only one applies because I do have to close my hand to grip this, but I want to make sure that there's still that little bit of space between my elbow and my rib cage, and I'm going to externally rotate. So we do want to make sure that we get both internal and external rotation, and that's exercise number 1. Exercise number 2, very basic exercise that we've all done. There's so many variations of this. This is the basic row, because really what we're trying to do is not only work our rotator cuff muscles, but we want to get all of the surrounding muscles on the back of our shoulder here as well. The basic row helps cover that. Now I'm going to do this with resistance training and my bands here. So simply a row, we want to make sure that we have very good posture. If you need to, reset your posture between every rep to make sure it's healthy. Pulling my shoulder blades together. There's so many variations or even angles that you could use in the row depending on where you put your elbow and where you're holding that. There's a high row, a low row, and even if you put a little bit of a twist into this, then you're also working some of those rotator cuff muscles as well. So the basic row, it could be done with resistance training, with bands, with dumbbells, any form of a row, and that's exercise number 2. Exercise number 3, probably the most important of all 3 exercises, we're going to work a muscle that's called the serratus anterior. That is a muscle that's on the side of our rib cage here. It's a muscle that almost looks like our fingers. It's right on the side here, and it's something you could feel, that I would encourage you to feel as you're doing this exercise. So one of the great ways to work this muscle and fire it is to keep that arm straight and push forward. And that in itself is not the easiest thing to do. If it's new to you, you might find that you're bending your arm to get that forward movement. If you're doing that, you're really working your tricep. The tricep is responsible for elbow extension. So we're trying to keep our arm straight and push forward. So one way to do this is to get some kind of resistance. Get a friend, get a buddy to put their hand there and push. And while you're pushing for their resistance, put your hand here. See if you could feel that muscle firing. And this is the exercise here. So there's a lot of different ways that you could work this. One way is with resistance. And I'll show a quick demo. I'm going to keep my arm straight, and I'm going to simply push forward. And I could even put my hand here to make sure I am firing this muscle. I could do this with dumbbells lying on my back. pushing forward. Another common way is after a push-up, a lot of people do this at the top of their push-up. Essentially what you're doing is pushing your shoulder blades away from each other. So if I get in a push-up, at the top of the push-up, further push away from the floor, and I'm pushing my shoulder blades apart, and that also is another way to work the serratus anterior. So really super important muscle that can get neglected. It's attached to our shoulder blade, in front of the shoulder blade here, and it's responsible for helping to keep our shoulder blade in place, which is so important for overall shoulder movement, especially overhead movement. Everything needs to be in place to really have healthy shoulder movement. So the serratus anterior, extremely important. Make sure you work that as well. That is exercise number 3. So there's your 3 exercises. We had the internal external rotation, we have the row and all the variations of that, and then we had the muscle to help work that serratus anterior, that muscle on the side there, super important. If you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to reach out anytime. I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching.